Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Land Development Podcast. I am your host, Ryan Glick. And if this is your first time joining us, our show has primarily been about having on individuals associated with the industry, hearing about their origin story, and then also hearing about some of the projects and deals that they've been involved with over the years. And we're actually going to mix it up today. We're going to try something a little bit different here and start doing some more current event topics on the show. We're not going to stop doing the interviews that we've been doing through episode 25 that we're on right now. We'll continue to do those, but it's going to really be an every other approach where we're going to do those interviews with individuals from the industry and then get into some more current events every other as well in between each of those being published. And I couldn't do that. I couldn't do this all by myself. So it was important for me to have somebody else come in here and join me walking through some of these headlines and these articles related to the industry, someone who has a lot of knowledge in the space. And with that, Charles Covey, who you'll probably remember from, I think it was episode number 4, but I may be mistaken on that. But he was on the podcast back then, and he's going to be joining us as well, walking through these articles and getting his expert opinion on things. So, Charles, I really appreciate you joining me for this one and future ones to come.
Yeah, this is going to be great. I love the format. It's going to be cool to see some topics and things that were already kind of popping up in the news, and let's dive in a little bit, and hopefully that gives the listeners, maybe we can shortcut things for them a little bit and kind of give some information on the news, and they can follow this instead of having to go read it in the paper. So this should be an advantage for everybody, and I'm excited about it.
Exactly. So here's the format that we're going to follow. I have 3 articles, again related to the industry that I'm going to pull up. For those of you who are listening on audio only, you won't necessarily be able to see the visuals, but we'll definitely explain it to you as we're walking through. But for those of you who are watching the video on YouTube, we actually have our screen shared here, and we'll be pulling up these articles and walking through them. So we'll explain a little bit about the article, and then we'll break it down a little bit and go beyond the headline. So let's go ahead and get into this with the first article here. Let me go ahead and pull it up. So this first article comes to us from the National Association of Home Builders, their Eye on Housing blog that they have. And with this article, the headline reads, "Affordability Pyramid shows 66.6 million households cannot buy a $250,000 home." And one thing I noticed about this article here is that it references a study that was done. It looks like a couple weeks ago from when we're recording this, so it's not necessarily a new thing. And so if I switch over to that study really quick on the screen here, and I should mention as well, all the articles and links and everything will be on the show notes page for this. So if you're wondering and you want to view some of the articles we're talking about, the links will be there. So I guess what I notice here is when they're saying people are priced out, they're saying that the minimum income that's required to purchase what they're saying are estimating to be the median price of a new home at $495,750 now is pricing out that number of people. And they have the chart on here as well that kind of shows where people, how many people can afford each of these homes. And so when I saw this, Charles, I guess I was looking at this and I was thinking, where are we at right now with we kind of understand how prices have increased over time, and they've always been increasing over time.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people, will see this and they'll panic and just, worry, like, is it going to just keep going up? And are we headed toward a future where people are just renting, or like, what are we, what does this really mean?
Yeah, you've got to look at the underlying information here, and I have happened to have done quite a bit of study on this one only because it applies directly to what we're doing. We're trying to build affordable rentals in our particular space, and that the housing cost directly correlates to the demand for us. Now, the what's interesting here is that if you look at the housing cost compared to income, it's all skewed, right? You go back to the 1950s and 60s when most would say that the US was in a really good position when the middle class was very strong. The home to income ratio, that expense was really where it needs to be. And it's just continued to inflate since then. And it's just, the incomes are not rising as fast as the housing. What's fascinating about that is if you take that same data set and then you overlay housing size average, it directly correlates with the price. Okay, boom. Like it's like mind blown when I saw this. So we're building too big a house. That is literally the issue. So it's not that there's this massive systemic issue and we just can't get anything built cheap anymore and costs have inflated too much. It's actually not that. The costs are pretty much in line dollar for dollar if you look at how they've inflated over time. It's the size of the home. Okay, so I'm not, obviously not the only person to see this data. A lot of people are seeing the same thing, and we're seeing this in the marketplace because you may see this on LinkedIn. Lennar and some of the others are building these very small form factor homes, trying to get into the 100s. Now, when they say it's in the 100s, it's in the very high 100s, like 190s. But they're trying to get below that $200,000 mark on the single family home, and it is doable. It's a little bitty house, and that's perfectly okay for a new couple or a single person or a retired person. There's giant swaths of the demographic that can live in a smaller form factor. And in fact, almost all of us can live probably in a smaller form factor than we are now. So that's really the paradigm shift, is to get people into a smaller footprint. And that's what's not showing on this chart. So, and this is typical. This is the way that the news works. It's got to be doom and gloom, and we got to, it's all going to hell in a handbasket. But really and truly, if people are willing to live in a smaller form factor home, the problem solves itself. So that's the thing that I think is the shift that we're seeing. We do see the shift happening. Tiny homes more popular than ever. Fascinating. These products that Lennar and others are building, they're on from a developer standpoint, they're on like a 20 to 30-foot lot, like a 26-foot lot, a
Yeah, they're pretty
30-foot lot.
small. Yeah.
These were townhome lots before, right? Now this is a single family detached lot, at 26 foot wide, which is it's completely, unusual from anything else we've ever seen. But that's what it's taking. That would be the key difference maybe to now in the 1950s, is that land costs may have inflated at a disproportionate rate. So we've got to get a pretty small format on the lot size to make that go, because of land costs. But this is a really cool thing to kind of dive into and analyze. The typical information that I've seen, economists typically would say that the home buyer needs to use 2.6 times their yearly income as the price for their home purchase. Well, you think about that. If you're working class, maybe two lower incomes or one pretty solid income and a stay-at-home wife, you've got a $70,000 to $80,000 salary. There's a lot of people have that, and that's a
Yeah.
very solid livable wage, or should be. Well, you multiply that times 2.6, it's not a very expensive house.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so people just have to scale that back and kind of change the expectations. We were in a period of extreme growth. There was lots of money flowing. People ballooned and inflated their expectations of what the home should be. And what size house did your grandparents live in?
Right. Not that big.
I bet it wasn't very big. Same
No.
for, so the house my dad was born in, it's in Sherman, Texas, tiny,
Yeah.
very comfortable. My grandparents don't complain about their time in this home at all. Zero complaints. They loved it. In fact, they probably have more fond memories of that time than they do of any time in their life.
Yeah.
And they lived in a small house that they could afford on one salary, and it worked well. And somehow, since the 60s, that's all been screwed up, and now we're doing something totally different. We have expectations. This is kind of the American way, right? Just keep growing and growing and growing your expectations.
That consumerism approach of like just buy more stuff,
I mean,
consume.
that's what we do better than anybody else in the world,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's exactly why the United States exists. That's why we became great, was because of that. And all the dollars kept flowing, and industry succeeded. You go to other countries and you don't see the problem quite to the same degree. Especially you go to developing countries, they're still where we used to be, and they're still living in, you got to, 3, 4 generations living in a 2, 3 bedroom, small apartment, and that's just normal. And
Yeah.
somehow here we've gotten a little bit skewed in our approach. So you see a lot of developers and a lot of builders looking at this and kind of understanding, hey, the numbers are what they are. We need to adjust. We need to build homes that can touch a giant chunk of this population. So what are your thoughts on that? Are you kind of picking up on this in what you do? Are you seeing, I mean, at Groove, are you seeing any of the smaller lot sizes and some of those things come about?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that does seem to be the trend. It seems to be the trend that you know, it feels about the only way that some of these things can be solved too, to be able to get, products for people that they can actually move into. And I was actually looking here as well. Let me flip over to this other tab. I was looking at the Federal Reserve numbers here with so this is the median sales price of houses sold for the United States. I have
Mhm.
a trim back going back to 2000, but it even going back further, if I drag this back, like just go back to the beginning of their data. I mean, it
Mhm.
just kind of steadily goes up. You have little peaks and stuff here, around the 2008,
Yep.
financial crisis and everything,
Yep.
housing crisis. And then it just continues to go up, and you have another peak when, things happen with COVID and everything. And
Yep.
then it started to come down a little bit, but
Yep.
they're,
But if you draw
yeah,
that, you draw the trend line in the middle, like, it all
yep.
kind of looks about right. We don't see any extremes here.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't know. I think what you're saying makes sense. I hadn't really thought of it that way. So
I think the data is on the Fred website. I think that's where we may have overlaid it this way one time. So you
okay.
may check that offline and post it for the listeners.
Yeah,
You can do an overlay of 2 data sets, average home size versus average home price, and it's like, "Whoa, this is amazing."
nice. Cool. Well, let's jump on to the next article here. Next one comes to us from Fox Business. Let me get this shared here. So this one's related to, I guess the title reads, Fort Worth's tallest building sells for just 12.3 million at auction in stunning price drop. And so
Yep.
this one's right in your backyard. So
Mhm.
just reading a little bit from here. The 40-story behemoth was bought back by Pinnacle Bank Texas in an auction after it claimed the previous owners defaulted. And it mentions down here that they $13 million loan was used to purchase a building in 2021. And I think, reading through this, you can kind of see the comments and stuff that you see on social media. It's like, well, the end of commercial real estate and what's going on. And then from my standpoint, I guess my when I see things like this, especially in the commercial space, I
Mhm.
think a lot about the businesses that pulled out of physical in-person work and went to this remote work. And it feels like a lot of them started to go, they initially went to a hybrid, but you're starting to see a lot more people pull back into the in-person for culture reasons. I mean, it's
Yep.
just a completely different environment and everything. But anyway, to this particular building, I know you had some, or at least you had seen this one in the news already. So what are your thoughts on this, or what kind of strikes you about this deal?
My gut feeling here is that this is a transaction for the bank's purposes for a certain reason. And I'm not familiar enough with how these foreclosure and auction proceedings work, but when they're saying the bank bought it back, my guess, and I would love if somebody has some more information. I'm sure one of your listeners has some information on this, would love to hear. I'm assuming the bank has to do this process in order to be able to write off the loss in a certain way or not write off the loss in a certain way. This strikes me as an anomaly. People see the numbers and they're like, "Oh my gosh, people are buying buildings for less than 10% of their value. This is unbelievable. Everything's crashing." I feel like this one is a bit of an anomaly, because the value is such an extreme difference. So I don't think we're going to see a lot of buildings bought at ten cents on the dollar. I do
Yeah.
think there are going to be deals. What's interesting to me is that I hear this a lot. As we're trying to get deals financed and get deals moving. Oftentimes, this is what we hear back from large firms or funds that would typically be investing in the kind of real estate that we're developing, and a lot of them have dry powder sitting, but they're really interested in getting deals. And our stuff is a good return, but it's just a pedestrian normal return because it's just a normal project. They would much rather get 10 cents on the dollar kind of returns. That's amazing. And so there's a lot of capital sitting on the sideline waiting for this exact kind of thing. My gut feeling, though, is that there's more capital sitting than there are going to be deals, at least based on what we've seen.
Yeah.
And these office deals are they're fascinating because everybody's like, okay, we'll just turn it into residential. It's a home run, and it's not that simple. There are office repurposes and rehabs and usage changes, but those are way more complicated because just from a construction standpoint, offices are typically built in a way that accommodates the office use, and that
Right.
may not accommodate the utility and other needs of the mixed use new idea. Additionally, think about this one. In an office, you put all the offices in the conference room, the high end offices in the conference rooms around the perimeter of the building. Those are usually glass walled so that lights gets in further to the building core, where all the cubicles are in towards the middle. And if the cubicles don't have any light, nobody cares, right? It's not a big deal. Well, when you're building residential, every room has to have a window, right? For sure. So now
Yeah.
you've got just this perimeter that's accessible. And if it's a wide enough floor plate, wide or long enough, now you got a bunch of middle area of the building footprints you can't really use for residential. So these residential conversions only work on certain floor plate formats that can accommodate that type of use in the windows. So it really is a complex use case to try to buy these cheap and convert them. So this one probably stays office use. It's actually a pretty good location. It's 1 million square feet. It's a giant building, a huge footprint. So Fort Worth's getting
Yeah,
a
so
lot of redevelopment. Hillwood just bought a whole block in downtown Fort Worth that they're going to develop. So I feel like this one is a bit of an anomaly, but it'll get a new life, and it's definitely going to be a nice office building in the future. So what are your thoughts there on the bank transaction, the bank buying it back, quote unquote? What do you think about that?
yeah, I don't. I mean, in all honesty, I don't have a whole lot of knowledge in that space. So, I like the thing that strikes me when I look at this is more so about. I was actually thinking what you had talked about is like, what's going to happen to some of these commercial spaces if we don't necessarily know what we don't know for sure what's going to happen in the future with these different businesses and whether they're going to come back in person full time and what the actual need is going to be from a commercial business standpoint for how many office spaces do we actually need, and if it comes in at a lower number than what's been built, then yeah, what does happen to some of these units? I think that's more so kind of what I think about is this to me at I guess at face value, I look at it and say, well, maybe it's just a bad investment by somebody, or a group came in and went in on this deal and it just didn't go the way they thought it was going to go, or the timing was bad, or you just don't know, because if they bought it back in 2000, I think it's at 21 is when it was bought, so that was kind of right in the peak of I think prices were really starting to go up and stuff back then, and I saw somewhere in here that they had a valuation done of it, and it was a significant number.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, an appraisal right here for 104.5 million. Uh, yeah, so I
Which
mean,
is still, and that's by the appraisal district, and that's usually
true.
low. So
Yeah,
it's still, still worth way more than this kind of quote unquote auction sale price.
right,
There's
right.
something with that. Maybe there's some complications to it. There could be some legal pending stuff on it, and that's why nobody else would touch it. Like there's something going
Yeah,
on there because there's plenty of dry powder sitting for firms that would have been on the courthouse steps bidding to get this thing at 2 or 3 or 4x what they ended up paying for it. So something
yeah,
seems unusual there. Kind of to your point, there is definitely less office demand than there was pre-COVID. No question. How much less, I think, is still to be determined. My gut feeling is it's 50 to 70% is probably the range of office demand. So then the nicest 50% of the office stuff, which is going to be well located, newer product, probably totally fine.
yep,
Leases maybe are a little bit slower, but it's not the nice stuff. We'll use a good example here in DFW. A lot of the listeners will know about the Legacy West development. So it's a live, work, play development. We got offices, we got a nice hotel, we got residential, we got high rise residential, we got great access to everything. Like this is a key spot, and the offices there, they're still building office towers now, and their corporate headquarters are still moving there, and that's going to continue to happen in places that have that great drive, great demand. People want to be there, and that's where the office stuff is going to focus, because we're seeing, and all the data that I'm seeing, all the people that are coming back to office, the lease size is typically shrinking for most companies. So they're shrinking 75 to 50% of their footprint. They don't need as much space. Almost all of them need some space, but if it's a flex or a hybrid, they don't need as much space. So they're shrinking their footprint. Maybe they're subleasing out part of it, and they're moving away from less than ideal locations because, frankly, the people don't want to go there. And how are you going to keep staff if they don't want to be where your office is? The ones that are really in deep trouble is you got the aging downtown core of a lot of major cities where you got stuff that was built in the 80s and 90s, and it's aging and it maybe hasn't been updated, and there's nothing else there. It's in an office monoculture, and nobody wants to go there, and they don't want to fight traffic to get there. Those are in deep trouble. Um, Dallas has some of those. Some other major cities have more. New York has a bunch of that stuff on the periphery. And then you've got the suburban office, like the low rise 2, 3, 4 story office that's in an office monoculture, giant parking lots, and tons of dead office where there's nothing else around and nobody wants to be there. Those are
yep,
screwed. Like they're in
yep,
bad shape, and there's not a lot else you can do with them. Those are very specific, purpose built buildings. Those are going to be in big trouble. Yeah, huge trouble.
yeah. Well, let's move on to the last one here. And before we do that, we're going to take just a really quick break. So we'll be right back. Just 1 second here. All right. We are back and we're going into the third and final headline here. So let me get this pulled up. All right. So, third headline reads: the economy could be heading toward 1970s style stagflation. What it means for the stock market. So, the subheadline says a small bout of stagflation would result in a 10 to 20% decline in the S&P 500, according to Stevens Report Research. I said that wrong. Sevens Report Research. So, kind of reading through this one here, U.S. economy could be barreling toward 1970s style stagflation amid a cooling economy and sticky inflation. Stagflation, quote, stagflation doesn't have to be as bad as it was in the 1970s, but for a stock market that's trading above 21 times earnings, the truth is that even a small bout of stagflation would result in a 10 to 20% decline in stocks, said Tom Essay, founder of Sevens Report Research, in a Monday note.
Yep.
So I don't have a ton of knowledge on this. I'm not a great economics mind or anything like that. But I did this headline did catch my attention because just seeing what's been happening in the economy and just kind of trying to figure out where is it going to land, like where are we going to end up. Articles like this are always interesting to me to kind of see what some people are predicting.
Yeah, I agree. So I have to study this stuff a lot only because what the economy is going to do, trying to look forward 6 months or 12 months is really critical to the business decision making that we have. And a lot of our projects, and these are projects that are even many years long. And so we really have to try to get as far into the future with our predictive analysis as possible. And so it's a huge element to be able to understand, hey, where do we think this is going, and try to have a high percentage guess on that. So I was an economics major in college. So I geek out on this stuff. This is great for me. This I'm just, I'm loving it. The stagflation is a fascinating thing because prior to the 70s, economists just assumed, and in fact held pretty vehemently, that stagflation was impossible. And so, like, okay, well, this isn't possible because you got the definition: you got high inflation, you got high unemployment, and then you've got stagnant demand. And so those three things, when those come together, they're like, that's not going to happen, and the stagflation is not real. Well, the 70s proved obviously that it was real. And it was pretty problematic, and they didn't have a real good ability to solve it. And that's the whole point of the stagnation portion of the name, is that it's really tough to kind of get an economy out of that without some pain. Now, the key thing here is that what is different about today versus the 70s? We got some massive differences. So, all things aside, yes, there is a decent chance that we are either already in a stagflation state or are headed to that direction. However, I don't think it's the same scenario as the 70s, where it's really hard to exit, and it really drug on for a long time, because a couple of things are different. The first is that we know stagflation is real. In the 70s, they didn't know what it was, and they hadn't studied it. Nobody had written research papers on it. The economics community didn't even believe it was possible, but all of a sudden it happened. And then they had to look back later and were like, oh crap, that actually was real. It happened. Here's the things that took place. Now we have better data because we're looking at it having seen it before. So that's hugely helpful. And the Fed's very aware of it. Whereas before, the Fed didn't really understand the concept. Now they know about it. Now they're going to be able to adjust differently. The other key element here is the information that we have at our fingertips. I mean, you saw earlier, you just went on the Fred website and you're pulling up data like crazy. Could you do this in the 70s? Absolutely
Right.
not. You would have to go to the freaking library and look through it and maybe dig through some things, and maybe you could find something similar, but it was going to be old data anyway. Today we have literally up to the moment data on what the economy is doing. And some of the stuff that the Fed's analyzing right now, it's a little bit lagging data. Some of the stuff in the CPI, I disagree with the way they analyze some of the numbers, because it's 3, 6, 9 months behind. I hate that, because we do have the ability for up to the second data. I think that that's helpful right now, because that even 9 month old data is way better data than they had in the 70s. So we still have so many advantages. I don't think we're going to get into a 70s esque stagflation, but I do think it's something we need to watch out for. And there's only a few things to do. Like in the 70s, what they did, Nixon was able to come in and he was able to, the labor was going, kind of going through the roof. And we saw that labor cost inflating, and that was kind of hurting a lot of different industries. And they were able to come in and cap labor rates. And that was one of the big elements. I don't know if that's the lever that's going to get pulled this time. That doesn't seem like a very popular one, but it could work. So it would be very interesting to see what the Fed and the other, policy experts decide to do on stagflation. It's real. I don't think it's going to be like the 70s, though.
Yeah. Not that type of ending to what we're seeing here.
Now,
What
one thing to note, where it says about the 10 to 20% decline in the market, I think that the market could still see a decline even without the stagflation scenario. I think what's the latest? The market's trading at like 21 times earnings on average. Like that's some of the numbers are getting a little bit out of control. So there could still
yeah.
be a market correction. A 10 to 20% correction really wouldn't be that far off if you look at the trend line. So 10 to 20% could still happen even without stagflation.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, we're living in a time that's, yeah, I mean, experiencing some very interesting things right now, and I think it probably goes without saying for everybody on here, but I figure I'll say it anyway that, anything that we're talking about right now is definitely not like financial advice on what you should do or what you should not do in anything in this industry or anything like that. But yeah, it's definitely something to keep an eye on. I think for all of us in this industry and really any industry for that matter. Anything else you want to add on this one before we call it a show?
Well, I love the topics, and all of these topics are so current and are going to continue to be very important topics over the rest of 24. So you could make the case that we got election coming up, we got all these things happening. 24 is going to be a very critical year in the history of the country. We're going to look back, and the history books are going to look back at 24 as a very pivotal year in so many ways, just including some of the ones we covered and some of the stuff that we'll cover in the future. So fascinating time to be talking about current events. And I think we're in a really cool moment, a cool inflection point in our country in 24.
For sure. All right. Well, there you have it for our first episode going through some current events. We'll continue to adjust and fine tune and things like that in future episodes and everything. But appreciate all of you for tuning in, and we will talk to you next time. Thanks.